In the heart of a deadly snowstorm, a young woman drags the lifeless body of a stranger through knee-deep snow, unaware that the man she just saved will soon change her life forever. Who is this man buried beneath frost and secrets? Why was he left to die at the edge of the world? And what will happen when two souls from entirely different worlds are forced to share one roof, one fire, and one fate? As the blizzard rages outside, a storm of truth, betrayal, and longing brews inside the walls of a tiny mountain cabin. She thought she was just saving a man's life. She had no idea she was about to save his soul and lose her heart. Don't look away. The storm is just beginning. Cascade Ridge, Montana, winter's edge. The wind screamed like a wounded animal, hurling snow sideways across the ridgeline. Branches cracked. Trees groaned under the weight of the storm. Nature wasn't just angry tonight, it was hungry. Ivy Quinn tightened her scarf around her neck, the wool stiff with ice. The cold bit at her cheeks, turned her breath to steam, and numbed the skin beneath her thick gloves. She should have been back at the cabin already. But the storm had come in faster than expected. Every instinct screamed, go home. Now. And yet, Ivy didn't rush. She never did. She moved with purpose, each step breaking through crusted snow that reached her thighs. In one hand, she carried her axe. In the other, a bundle of kindling tied together with leather cord. This wasn't her first white oat. At 27, Ivy had lived her entire life under the shadow of Cascade Ridge, raised in a cabin most people would call uninhabitable. But to her and Evie, her sharp-tongued, steel-spined grandmother, it was home. They didn't have neighbors. Or Wi-Fi. Or panic buttons. What they had was fire, instinct, and grit. Nature doesn't kill out of cruelty, Evie always said. It kills because people forget how to listen. And Ivy listened, to the creak of the trees, to the shift of the wind. But what she heard now stopped her dead in her tracks. A sound, thin and raw, swallowed by the wind. But unmistakable. A moan. Human. Ivy turned her head slowly. Heart thudding. The sound came again, softer this time, barely more than a whisper. Someone was out here. She dropped the kindling and moved toward the noise, her senses burning. Between the pines, a shallow dip in the terrain revealed something unnatural, a flash of dark fabric beneath a crust of snow. She rushed forward, fell to her knees, and started digging with her gloved hands. There he was. A man, half buried in snow, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. His skin was deathly pale. Frost clung to his eyelashes. One eye was swollen shut, and blood, half frozen, had dried along his temple. He should have been dead. But then, his chest rose. Barely. Jesus Christ, Ivy breathed. You're still breathing. She touched his neck, faint pulse. He's alive. Barely. Looking around, there were no tracks. No snowmobile. No vehicle. No other footprints. It was like he had fallen from the sky. What the hell happened to you? She muttered. He groaned. His cracked lips moved, but no words came. He was shivering violently now, the first sign of his body trying to fight back. Ivy knew what came next. The cold would stop feeling cold. He'd get sleepy. Peaceful. And then he'd die. Not today. She grabbed him under the arms, gritting her teeth as she tried to lift him. He was deadweight, tall, broad, and clearly not the type used to mountain terrain. You better not be a damn criminal, she hissed, because I am not dragging a serial killer back to my house. Bit by bit, she pulled him through the snow. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. The wind slammed into her like a wave. But she didn't stop. It took her nearly 40 minutes to get him to the cabin. Evie threw open the door the second Ivy burst onto the porch, half dragging, half carrying the man behind her. "Sweet mercy, Ivy, what the devil is that?" "A popsicle with a pulse," she panted. "Get blankets. Towels. I think he's bleeding from the head." Evie didn't ask questions. She simply moved. The old woman had seen enough bad winters to know better. They laid the man near the fire. Ivy yanked off his snow-soaked coat and boots, working quickly to strip the layers that could kill him faster than the cold. "He's burning up," Evie said, pressing a hand to his forehead. "But his skin's ice." "That's bad." Ivy found herself staring at his face. There was something unnervingly clean about him. His features were sharp, well-groomed even beneath the bruises. Hands with no callus. Skin with no sun damage. This wasn't some drifter or lost backpacker. He looked like a man with a driver. Evie must have noticed too. "You dragged a rich man out of the snow." "He was dying," Ivy snapped. "I didn't stop to ask for his net worth." The man stirred, then let out a broken gasp. His lips moved again. This time, a word formed. "G. Garrett." Ivy leaned closer. "Who's Garrett?" But the man had already slipped back into unconsciousness. Ivy stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. Somewhere deep in her gut, something shifted. Something cold and uncertain. This man, whoever he was, hadn't just gotten lost in the storm. He had been left there. And someone had wanted him to die. Outside, the storm raged like a beast unchained. Snow battered the windows, wind howled through the trees, and the night swallowed the forest whole. But inside the cabin, a different world pulsed, quiet, warm, and flickering with the golden glow of firelight. Ivy sat beside the stranger, her sleeves rolled up, steam rising from a bowl of water mixed with crushed willow bark and yarrow. The man, still unconscious, lay wrapped in wool blankets on Evie's old leather couch, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. His skin was clammy now, the fever breaking in waves. Ivy dipped the cloth in the herbal mixture and pressed it gently to his forehead. "Come on, stranger," she whispered. "You didn't drag your ass through a blizzard just to die on my couch." He stirred slightly, groaning. One hand twitched beneath the blanket. Evie moved quietly behind her, tending to a simmering pot on the stove. The scent of sage, broth, and roasted root vegetables filled the air. "He's stable for now," Ivy said, not turning around. Evie nodded. "His body's fighting. That's something." Ivy glanced down again. His face was less ghostly now, though the bruises still looked brutal. She'd stitched the gash at his temple earlier that morning, her hand steady despite the knot in her stomach. Whoever had done this hadn't just left him for dead, they wanted him dead. She studied the way his lips were parted, the faint stubble on his jaw, the crease between his brows even in sleep. "Who are you?" It wasn't until late the next night that he woke. The fire had died down to coals. Ivy was sharpening a knife by the window, the storm finally settling into a soft, persistent snowfall. She heard it before she saw it, a low, ragged breath followed by a pained groan. Her head snapped around. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Blue-gray, stormy like the skies outside. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then tried to sit up and immediately cried out, his hand flying to his side. "Easy," Ivy said, crossing the room. "Don't move. You've got bruised ribs, maybe cracked." Where?" His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "Where am I?" "Cascade Ridge. Montana. My cabin." He squinted, struggling to sit upright again. His gaze darted to the fireplace, the window, then back to her. "Who are you?" "The woman who dragged your frozen ass out of a snowbank," she said flatly. "I?" He winced, putting a hand to his temple. "I don't remember. There was a car. I think. No, there was a deal. A man, Garrett." Ivy froze. That name again. He noticed. "I said that before, didn't I?" "Garrett." She nodded slowly. "You said it in your sleep. Who is he?" His eyes clouded. "I don't know. I should know. Damn it, I can't think straight. That's the fever and the concussion talking. Your body's been through hell. Just rest." He stared at her, trying to place her, trying to understand the rough-cut woman in flannel and denim with eyes like polished amber and a voice that didn't flinch. "You live here?" "Yeah." "Alone?" Ivy raised an eyebrow. "Wouldn't you like to know?" He let out a breath, something between a laugh and a cough. "This place. It's like another planet." Ivy folded her arms. "Not from around here, huh?" He shook his head slowly. "No. Definitely not." For a long moment, there was silence. Only the crackle of the fire between them. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "What's your name?" Ivy hesitated. Then, "Ivy Quinn." He gave a faint nod. "Knox," he said finally. "Knox Wilder." By the third day, the bruises on Knox's face had begun to fade, but the tension in the cabin had only grown sharper. Ivy could feel it. The way his eyes lingered too long on his dead phone, the way he flinched every time she handed him something rough and real, like a hatchet, or a bowl of stew without a spoon. He'd never say it out loud, but she could read it all over him. The man was soft. The wilderness scared the hell out of him. And worse, he thought he was hiding it. That morning, she caught him near the window, his phone held high like a lost sailor looking for a signal in a sea of trees. "Still no bars?" she asked flatly, stomping snow off her boots as she entered. Knox turned, clearly startled. "How far are we from the nearest town?" 10 miles as the crow flies. 15 if you don't want to fall off a cliff." He glanced at his phone again, frustration tightening his jaw. "You don't have a satellite connection? A radio? Something?" Ivy let out a dry laugh. "Welcome to the ridge. Out here, connection means not freezing to death." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Unbelievable. No Wi-Fi. No cell. No car. No damn coffee." She cocked her head. "You were unconscious and hypothermic 3 days ago. But sure, let's prioritize your caffeine withdrawal." He opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed. "I'm sorry. I'm just not used to this." "Yeah, I figured," Ivy muttered, tossing more logs into the fire. "You've got City Boy written all over you." His brows shot up. "And you've got Savage written all over you." She turned slowly. "Wanna try that again?" "No offense," he said, raising his hands. "It's just, this isn't exactly a 5-star recovery suite." "Oh, I'm sorry," she snapped. "Next time I find a half-dead man in the snow, I'll drag him to a damn Hilton." "I didn't ask you to save me." "No," she said, stepping closer, voice like flint, "you didn't. But someone sure as hell left you out there to die." That shut him up. She let the silence stretch, then tossed him a coat. "Put this on. You're helping me chop wood." He blinked. What? You've got legs. You're breathing. Time to contribute." I've never chopped wood in my life. Perfect. Let's start now. Out back, snow dusted the clearing like powdered sugar over a frozen graveyard. Ivy handed Knox an axe, watched him hold it like it was radioactive. The hell is this thing made of? Lead? He muttered. It's called steel, Knox. The same thing you're gonna be if you stop whining and swing. He gave her a look, lined up with the log, and swung. It bounced off, barely nicking the surface. Ivy tried not to laugh. Wow! That was almost adorable. Hey, I'm trying, okay. Try harder. After several failed attempts, the axe finally split the log, awkward, clumsy, but functional. Knox wiped sweat from his brow. You know, in my world, I pay people to do this kind of thing. Ivy smirked. In my world, people who say that don't get fed. By the end of the day, they were both covered in sawdust and sweat. Back in the cabin, Knox collapsed onto a bench, groaning. My arms are going to fall off. Ivy handed him a cup of hot broth. Good. Less weight to carry through the snow. He sipped, then eyed her curiously. So, you really grew up out here? She nodded, stirring a pot over the fire. Since I was 8. After my mom died. Knox frowned. I'm sorry. She shrugged, but the shadow behind her eyes didn't. Grandma Evie raised me. Taught me everything I know. How to hunt. Track. Make fire. Stitch a wound. The usual bedtime stories. Sounds intense. It was survival. They fell into a quiet rhythm after that. She taught him how to gut fish. How to patch holes in the roof. How to start a fire without lighter fluid, an experience that ended with singed eyebrows and Knox yelling, "Is this legal?" He cursed a lot. Complained more. But he never quit. And that earned Ivy's reluctant respect. That night, as the wind howled against the cabin walls and the firelight flickered across their faces, he looked at her and said, more softly than ever, "Thank you. For not giving up on me." She didn't smile. But something in her chest warmed. "Don't thank me yet," she muttered. "Tomorrow you're learning how to clean a latrine." Days blurred into one another, stitched together by firelight, falling snow, and an unspoken truce. Knox, once so hopelessly out of place, now moved through the cabin like a man slowly remembering how to be human without a phone, a driver, or a schedule. He still grumbled when he chopped wood, but he chopped. He burned their first attempt at sourdough bread, but he tried. He couldn't catch a fish to save his life, but when Ivy laughed at him falling into the stream, he laughed with her. And Ivy, God help her, was starting to enjoy having him around. She'd always been suspicious of outsiders. Especially men in suits with expensive boots and fake smiles. But Knox didn't talk about stock markets or yachts. Not anymore. He asked questions about the ridge. About the trees. About her. And when she answered, he listened. One night, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, sipping pine tea as the northern lights shimmered in the sky like a dream barely whispered. Knox leaned back against the wooden rail, his voice low. "You ever think about leaving here? Going somewhere else?" Ivy shook her head. "This place is in my blood. I know every trail, every sound. I know when a storm's coming just by the way the wind tastes." He looked at her with something close to awe. "You're incredible, you know that?" She glanced at him, surprised. "You could have just left me out there," he added. "But you didn't. You risked your life." She looked away, her voice quieter. "You were still breathing. That was reason enough." The trust between them deepened, but it was the bear that changed everything. It was just after dawn. Ivy had gone out to gather snares while Knox stayed behind, trying to boil water for breakfast. He was humming some tune from the city when the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. Then he heard it. A low, guttural growl, deep, ancient, primal. He turned toward the front window, just as the enormous shape moved out of the tree line. A grizzly, full-grown, starving, and heading straight for the cabin. "Osha, Ivy!" he bellowed, backing away. The bear rammed the door with its massive shoulder, shaking the entire frame. Knox scrambled for the fireplace poker, the only thing that looked remotely weapon-like. "This is not how I die," he muttered. "I refuse to be mauled in flannel." Suddenly, the front door burst open, not from the bear, but from Ivy, breathless and mud-streaked. Her eyes widened. "Stay back," she barked. Knox started to step forward. "I said back." She moved fast, grabbing the flare gun mounted near the kitchen shelf. She popped the safety, aimed, and fired toward the bear's feet. A blinding flash of red light hissed across the snow. The bear roared, reared up, then charged away into the trees, more scared than wounded. The silence that followed was deafening. Knox slumped against the wall, heart hammering. "You keep a flare gun by the kitchen." Ivy dropped into a chair, panting. "You keep knives in your kitchen, don't you?" He stared at her. Then laughed, half hysterical, half in awe. "You're insane." She looked at him, eyes narrowing. "You were going to fight that bear with a fireplace poker." "I was trying to help." "You were trying to die." He stood, still shaking, and moved toward her. "I didn't run." She blinked. That stopped her cold. He was right. For all his fear, for all the luxury he came from, he hadn't bolted. He hadn't hidden. He had stood his ground. For her. Ivy stared at him, something soft unfurling in her chest. She hadn't let anyone this close in years. But right now, looking at this disheveled, ridiculous, brave man, something shifted. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. Knox reached for her hand. Just lightly. No pressure. No presumption. Just warmth. "Thanks for saving me." Again. Ivy exhaled. Then said quietly, "We saved each other." And for the first time since the storm began, the world felt a little less cold. It started with a dream. Knox sat up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. His heart pounded like a war drum. The images were fragmented, blurry, but sharp enough to wound. A firelit room. A crystal decanter. Garrett's face. A toast. A bitter aftertaste. And then darkness. Snow. Cold. Nothing. He gasped, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the couch. Ivy, half asleep in the armchair across the room, blinked awake. "What is it?" Knox shook his head, struggling to breathe. "I saw him. Garrett. I remember now." She was on her feet in seconds, moving toward him. "What do you mean, you saw him?" "He drugged me." Knox's voice was flat, hollow. "That night. The night before the blizzard. We were celebrating. I was about to sign the Cascade mining contract, millions on the table. Garrett poured the drinks. I tasted something off. Next thing I knew, I was freezing to death at the edge of a mountain." Ivy said nothing. Just watched him with sharp, steady eyes. He continued, voice shaking, "He set it up. Everything. Left me out there like trash. If you hadn't found me." He looked at her, emotion rising in his throat. I would have died. Silence fell like snowfall. Then Ivy spoke. So what now? Knox looked down at his hands, then toward the window, where the world was still buried in white. Now? He repeated. Now I go home. To Seattle. I have to fix this. I have to expose him, take back everything he tried to steal. She didn't flinch. Didn't move. But he saw it in her face, the first crack. The faintest flicker of something she couldn't quite hide. You're leaving, she said. Not forever. He stepped closer. I'll come back. I swear it. Ivy stared at him, arms crossed tightly across her chest like she was holding herself together. City people say a lot of things, she murmured. I'm not the same man who came here, Knox said, softer now. And you're the reason why. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the torn photo he'd found in his wallet the day before, him and Garrett, arms over each other's shoulders, both smiling like brothers. I used to believe this meant something. That loyalty was real. He ripped the photo in half. Now I know better. Ivy's throat worked, but she didn't speak. Finally, Knox moved toward her. Slowly. Carefully. And when he was close enough, he took her hand. When I'm done, he said, I'll come back. I'll find you. No matter what. She didn't pull away. But she didn't hold him tighter, either. You don't owe me anything, she said quietly. No, he replied. But I want to. And then, he left. He didn't look back. Ivy stood at the edge of the porch, arms wrapped around herself, as the sound of sled dogs and snow faded into the distance. She didn't cry. But God. It felt like something had been carved out of her chest. The city skyline pierced through a steel-gray sky, all glass and ambition and noise. But to Knox Wilder, Seattle had never felt colder. 3 weeks had passed since he left Cascade Ridge, 3 sleepless, ruthless weeks of piecing his life back together. And dismantling the man who tried to destroy it. The first thing he did was walk into Wilder Holdings headquarters, wearing the same boots he wore in the snow. His staff stared, startled by his sudden reappearance and his transformation. Gone was the polished billionaire in $1,000 suits. This man looked like he'd walked out of a forest fire and decided to burn the world down with him. He started quietly. Pulled bank records. Private emails. Surveillance logs. With the help of a trusted tech consultant and a very pissed-off former assistant Garrett had once fired for asking too many questions, Knox built a digital trail of deceit. Offshore accounts. Falsified reports. Fraudulent contracts tied to Cascade Ridge's mining rights. And then, the smoking gun, footage from a private hotel bar. Garrett slipping a vial into Knox's drink. That clip, together with the medical report from Cascade Ridge's local clinic, signed by a retired Army medic Evie happened to know, was more than enough. Knox didn't go to the cops first. He went to the press. The headlines exploded within hours. Corporate executive tried to kill his own CEO for gold fortune. From Wilderness to Wall Street, the survival of Knox Wilder. Betrayal at 10,000 feet. The Garrett Langston scandal. Garrett was arrested the next morning at a country club brunch in Bellevue. They say he was still holding a mimosa when the cuffs clicked shut. Knox sat across the aisle in the courtroom, jaw clenched as Garrett was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking like a man who couldn't believe the world had caught up with him. The judge didn't blink. Garrett Langston was charged with corporate fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. He pled guilty. 25 years. No parole for the first 10. When the verdict was read, Garrett didn't look at Knox. Not once. And Knox. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood and walked out without a word. Because it was done. And he felt nothing. He reclaimed his seat as CEO within the week. There were cameras. Applause. Press releases. They welcomed him back like a king. But Knox looked around the boardroom, the marble walls, the polished glass, and felt like a ghost in someone else's skin. The city hadn't changed. He had. That night, he stood at his penthouse window, staring out over the lights of Seattle. A drink untouched in his hand. He thought of the woman in flannel, who didn't flinch when bears charged her door. He thought of firelight, pine-scented silence, and the sound of Ivy's voice saying, "We saved each other." And he realized he had taken back everything. Except the only thing that had ever really mattered. The office was quiet. The lights dimmed. The skyline of Seattle stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering like a crown of ice. Knox stood in the center of the boardroom, surrounded by silence and luxury, and something inside him finally gave way. He didn't need this. Not anymore. Within the next month, Knox made the most unconventional move in his company's history. He called for restructuring, not to cut costs or improve shareholder value, but to redirect a portion of the company's capital into something unheard of for a mining magnate. Conservation. Not the usual performative greenwashing. Real action. Real change. He sold off 2 subsidiary mining sites and established the Northern Haven Project, a plan to build a safe, sustainable wilderness retreat deep in Cascade Ridge. A place for healing, he explained to his bewildered investors. Not extraction. The lodge would provide guided survival training, emergency shelters, and resources for hikers and locals. A portion of its profits would go directly to the community, funding winter gear, food banks, and educational programs for kids who, like Ivy once did, grew up learning to fight the forest alone. He poured his soul into the project. Not because it was profitable, but because it was right. Because it brought him back to her. Weeks later, the air in Cascade Ridge hadn't changed. It was still sharp as glass, fresh as pine, biting at the skin with every breath. Ivy was outside chopping wood when she heard it, the distant, rhythmic sound of sled dogs. She straightened, wiping sweat from her brow, heart thudding for a reason she couldn't name. They never got visitors this time of year. Then she saw him. Standing at the tree line. Tall. Steady. Eyes locked on hers. Knox. He was bundled in furs and flannel, his breath clouding in the air. And in his gloved hands, rolled and carefully bound, was a large sheet of paper. Ivy stared. Her axe hung loosely at her side. He took a step forward. "I told you I'd come back." Still, she said nothing. But her heart was roaring in her chest. He unrolled the blueprint and held it out. "Northern Haven Lodge," he said. "Right here. Built for these mountains. For people like you. Safe. Sustainable. Real." She stepped forward slowly, eyes scanning the design, elevated cabins, emergency bunkers, a community center. A map of trails. Solar grids. Wind resistance testing. It was brilliant. And insane. And so. Him. "You did all this?" she asked, voice tight. He nodded. "Because of you. Because of what you showed me. I want to give something back to this place. To you." She looked up at him, expression unreadable. "And what if the mountains don't want you back?" He smiled, soft and unshakable. "Then I'll learn to listen harder." And this time, she didn't look away. Construction began in early spring, when the snow started melting just enough to reveal the bones of the earth beneath. It was slow, brutal work. Temperatures still dipped below freezing at night, and the mountain refused to give anything easily. But Ivy knew this land like her own skin. And Knox. He was learning to bleed for it. He no longer flinched when the wind screamed through the trees. He knew how to split logs with one swing. How to patch a leaky roof in under 5 minutes. How to trap and release a snowshoe hare without hurting it. And most importantly, he learned to wake up before sunrise without cursing. Ivy watched him climb scaffolding, shovel snow from pathways, carry beams across uneven ground. He worked until his back ached and his hands blistered. He never complained. Not because it was easy, but because he had never wanted anything this much. Not the gold. Not the empire. Sometimes, they argued over design choices. You can't just install heated floors in the cabin bathroom, Knox, Ivy snapped one afternoon, glaring at the blueprint. He grinned over his coffee. Why not? Even mountain people deserve warm toes. Other times, they shared quiet moments no one else would ever witness, laughing by the fire, sharing soup on a frozen porch, watching the stars blink into existence over the ridge. And one night, as they repaired the roof together, Ivy looked down at him, mud-streaked, exhausted, smiling, and realized something simple but undeniable. She had loved him for a long time. Not just since he came back, but since the moment he'd looked her in the eye, shivering, lost, and still called her brave. She told Evie one night by the fire, half hoping the old woman was already asleep. I think I'm in love with him. Evie didn't even open her eyes. Took you long enough. Ivy blinked. You knew. Evie gave a small, smug smile. You don't cut off half your dear jerky stash for someone unless they've crawled under your skin, girl. Ivy blushed. And for the first time in years, she didn't argue. The mountain was quiet that night, quiet in the way only deep winter could be. Snowflakes drifted like whispers from the sky, catching the moonlight and turning the world silver. Knox had asked Ivy to follow him just after dinner, his voice calm, but his hands betraying the tremble beneath his gloves. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. Ivy had squinted at him. At this hour? It's below freezing. You faced down a bear, Quinn. I think you can handle a little frostbite. So she followed him, up the winding trail toward the summit, through a path they had once hiked weeks ago, when he could barely breathe, and she still thought he was a spoiled stranger with soft hands and city eyes. Now? He walked beside her, step for step, carrying a thermos of tea and something tucked deep in his coat pocket. At the top, the world stretched wide around them, endless trees dusted in white, the lodge's warm lights flickering faintly in the distance, and stars so sharp they looked like they'd been hammered into the sky. Ivy exhaled, a slow cloud of breath. Still breathtaking, huh? Knox didn't answer right away. He turned to face her. Not as much as you, he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. That's the cold talking. No, he said, suddenly serious. It's not. He took a breath. Then dropped to one knee in the snow. Ivy's heart stopped. The cold vanished. All that existed was him. He pulled out a small velvet box, its corners weathered from the journey, but inside, a ring that shimmered like frost kissed by firelight. His voice shook as he spoke. Ivy Quinn. You dragged me out of a storm when the world had forgotten me. You taught me how to live when I barely remembered how to breathe. You saved me from the cold, from myself. He looked up at her, eyes filled with more honesty than she'd ever seen in a man. Now I want to spend every breath I have loving you. Will you marry me? There was a beat. A long, frozen heartbeat where the world waited. Then Ivy laughed, soft and full, her eyes glistening. "You're such an idiot." Knox blinked. "That's not a no." She dropped to her knees in front of him, hands cupping his face, eyes shimmering. "It's a yes, you beautiful, stubborn idiot." "Of course it's a yes." And as the snow fell around them, they kissed, two souls stitched together not by chance, but by survival, by fire, by love that had clawed its way through storm and silence to be heard. They were married in early fall, beneath the turning leaves and the open sky. There were no chandeliers. No guest lists of hundreds. Just a clearing in the woods, a handmade arch of pine branches and wildflowers, and the people who mattered. Evie officiated, naturally. She wore her best sweater and a sarcastic smile. "By the power vested in me by no one at all," she said, "I now pronounce you idiots officially hitched." Ivy wore a white dress stitched by hand, simple and elegant. Knox wore a tailored jacket and muddy boots. They exchanged rings carved from local cedar wood, inlaid with silver. It was imperfect. Unpolished. It was perfect. The years passed, but the magic didn't fade. Northern Haven Lodge became a haven in the truest sense, a place where lost hikers were found, where children learned to read maps and track deer prints, where ex-city folks learned how to breathe again. And at the heart of it all, Ivy and Knox. Partners. Builders. Soulmates. But nothing changed them more than the day Lily Wilder was born. She came into the world on a snowy morning, screaming like a warrior. Ivy swore the trees outside shook when she cried. Lily was fearless from the start. At 3, she was climbing furniture. At 5, she was climbing trees. By 6, she had already built her first animal trap, which accidentally caught Evie's scarf. "She's got your spirit," Knox would say, watching Ivy chase after their daughter, both of them laughing like the mountain belonged to them. "And your brain," Ivy would reply. "God help us." Lily had Ivy's fire. Knox's calm. And her own wild, unstoppable light. She grew up knowing the smell of pine better than perfume. She knew how to make a fire, how to tell when snow was coming just by the way the sky turned pale. She asked questions about everything. The stars. The animals. The past. "How did you meet Daddy?" she asked one night, curled up by the fireplace. Ivy smiled. "He dropped out of the sky and landed in the snow." Knox laughed. "And your mom saved me. Twice. Did you fall in love right away?" They looked at each other. And neither spoke for a moment. Then Ivy said softly, "No. But my heart started to remember what love could feel like." Lily yawned, satisfied, and fell asleep wrapped in a blanket of stories. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge and the mountains turned gold, Knox stood alone on the porch of the lodge. He watched his daughter racing through the trees. He listened to Ivy's voice calling out to her, warm and fierce. He felt the fire crackling behind him, the laughter of guests, the creak of the old floorboards they had laid together. And he knew. He had once thought power was purpose. That success was skyscrapers and suits and signatures. But this messy, honest, wild life he had built with Ivy. This was the truest wealth he would ever know. He whispered to the wind, barely a breath. "Thank you for the storm. Because without it, he never would have found home." In the heart of a ruthless winter, on a mountain where survival was never guaranteed, two lost souls collided, not by fate, but by fire, by will, by the stubborn defiance of love. Ivy Quinn, a woman forged by wilderness, found more than a stranger in the snow, she found a reason to trust again. Knox Wilder, a man built for boardrooms, nearly died in silence, only to be reborn in the quiet strength of a cabin, a fire, and a woman who didn't flinch. They built something greater than a lodge. Greater than a legacy. They built a life. And in the end, as seasons passed and the snow returned, Knox understood something he never could in the noise of the city. Wealth fades. Power shifts. But love, real, raw, and wild, endures. In the face of nature's harshness, a lost heart was saved by the purity of love. When everything else is stripped away, the only treasure worth holding on to is family.